It's my nerd world. Welcome to it, a Star Wars show. On this week's episode, Entertainment Weekly talks about the return of Vader in the live-action Obi-Wan Kenobi series coming in the next few months. New live-action show that has not been revealed yet has gone into production. I'll give you details as submitted by Bespin Bulletin. Also, the Rise of Skywalker concept art that had never before been seen reveals more production secrets, and why the Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, will one day be called a classic. Thank you so much for checking the show out this week. Let's go ahead and get to it.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now, you're coming together. Is your undoing. Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you. Always.
My Nerd World.
I'm glad you're with the show again this week. It is my Nerd World, a Star Wars show, and I'm your host, Jon Justice. If you are watching / listening on YouTube and you're wondering, where's the video? There's no video this week. I'm probably going to put a hold on the video version of the show for the next few weeks, at least until the Obi-Wan Kenobi series comes out. Mostly because I'm really busy right now wrapping up the final edit to prepare for Book 7 in my EMBARK science fiction series, Battle Planet, for its release here in the next few weeks. And because of that and the time it takes for me to put the video portion of it together, I decided to put that on hold. And again, my expectation is that I'll get back to the video part of the show for YouTube, especially when the Obi-Wan Kenobi show drops. But we got a lot of ground to cover on this week's show, and I just want to make one comment. Later in the show, before we get to a few of the listener feedback emails that I received, we'll talk a bit about, and I'll share with you my thoughts why I think that the Rise of Skywalker will eventually be called a classic in terms of Star Wars films. And again, it's all in my opinion. One of the reasons, though, and I was just reminded of that listening to that intro for this week's My Nerd World show, is the soundtrack. I didn't include it in my notes and my rationale as to why I think the Rise of Skywalker will be called a classic, but to me, for this fan, the soundtrack to The Rise of Skywalker is some of John Williams' best work. Certainly the best work of John Williams across the entire sequel trilogy, in my opinion. The score to The Rise of Skywalker and some of those themes are just absolutely beautiful. And it's probably the soundtrack next to The Empire Strikes Back that receives the most repeat listens for this fan. So, and again, I'll get into more of this coming up a little bit later on in the episode. Let's dive into though quite a bit of news that has come out in this past week, starting with an article from Entertainment Weekly with its director regarding Darth Vader and his appearance in the Obi-Wan Kenobi live-action show on Disney+.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
There's not a lot new doing that thing with my fingers in this article. It still is interesting nonetheless to get into the thought process and the creative process around this highly anticipated live-action show. The decision to include the Dark Lord of the Sith did not come lightly. Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy told Entertainment Weekly, "The debate around whether we should do that or not carried on for quite some time. Everybody within our creative team has strong opinions, and all of our fans have strong opinions. So when you realize that you're under that level of scrutiny, certainly a story point like that is going to be scrutinized at a very high level. We talked about it constantly." Now, that's really fascinating from the perspective of how much creative control does the writer have for this. It's not like somebody wrote a book, they wrote a screenplay, and they did the best they could to bring elements of that book to the screenplay, and the writer of that book was bent on having it. It sounds like this, again, was more of creation via committee, where they decide, hey, we want a story, we wanted to include Darth Vader, can you write a screenplay that surrounds that? Just very different, at least from the way, like for me, when I write my stories, or typically the way you see these types of stories develop. But when you're looking at something like Star Wars, it's not surprising. When we talked to the Obi-Wan Kenobi director Deborah Chow to get her take on why they ultimately chose to bring back the former Anakin Skywalker, what kind of Darth Vader can we expect to see, and what happened when Hayden Christensen showed up on the set for the first time in the black armor. EW asks, so why did you decide to bring Darth Vader back for the series? Deborah Chow says, honestly, for me, the starting place was that I really wanted to do something that was character-based and character-driven, because that is the benefit of a limited series, is that you have more time to sort of tell a real character story. And for me, the starting place of a character is you just start, and you look at who's been important to him in his life. And it's quite hard to avoid Anakin/Vader in that scenario, especially coming out of Revenge of the Sith. So really, it came out of an evolution of the character for me. It wasn't just to sort of bring him back. It was really like, who means something, and where are we at this point in the timeline with Vader? How is it working with Hayden Christensen? He's lovely. And he's absolutely wonderful. And Canadian. So the first time I met him was actually in Toronto. And it was really nice because we sort of met up in Canada. And obviously, both with people like Ewan and Hayden, they've been these characters for so long. And they obviously did them in the prequels. So they've lived with this character in their lives for so long that they just know the character so well, which makes it so helpful in terms of the creative. I love hearing tidbits like that and details like that, because I'm just imagining Deborah Chow as a director going to Canada to meet with Hayden Christensen for the sole purpose of talking about him reprising his role as Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader. I mean, that's just cool to me. The creative process that takes individuals and to these places to meet, to talk about this thing that we all genuinely love and is so important for us. It's so important to us. Can you imagine like being in the restaurant and being a Star Wars fan and actually obviously knowing who Hayden Christensen is, but also perhaps knowing who Deborah Chow is and seeing those two individuals meet? I mean, that would just be rad. What was it like when Darth Vader first showed up on the set? Obviously, Hayden was going to be a part of the series, and when he first came on the set for us, it definitely had a very special feeling. And it was a really interesting moment for me, because you really started to see the different generations and how they connect to Star Wars and the franchise, where you have a generation that grew up with the prequels first, and with Hayden, it's a totally different thing for them than a generation that grew up with the originals. And then there's the younger generations with the new ones. So it really felt special bringing him back. And obviously I'm Canadian and he's Canadian, so that was also very heartwarming for me. We are having some Canadian pride that day. There needs to be a name, and maybe there already is one out there, but there really needs to be a name for the generation of fans that grew up with all three of these trilogies. Senior Star Wars fans. God, my gosh, I'd hate to coin it that way. I don't want that label yet. But it really is that there is this generation of individuals like myself, and probably, you listening, some of you listening, who grew up with all of them, having seen them at age 5, or like my father, who took me to go see it at age 5, who, it's been, for individuals like myself, it's hard to imagine a world that didn't have Star Wars. For individuals like my father, he can go, and as a matter of fact, I should talk to him about this. This would be a fun conversation. But, imagining life prior to Star Wars, where I don't really remember life prior to Star Wars. It's always been there. There needs to be a name. We have millennials and Generation X. We need the equivalent for Star Wars fans. Those that knew life before Star Wars, those that only knew life with Star Wars, and those that knew life with Star Wars and all 3 of the trilogies. We need to work on that. Workshop it. Drop me an email, talkshownerd@gmail.com. What were your feelings for you working with that iconic character? Ewan McGregor told me he couldn't figure out why everyone on the set was so excited one day, and he looked over and saw Vader and was like, blank, of course. The first time I saw him, says Deborah Chow, in costume, and the full thing going, he's towering over me. He's literally almost twice my size, it felt like, and it's really intense to have such an iconic character and then to be directing him and to be doing new scenes with him. So I do remember poor Ewan that day. He's like, what am I, chopped liver in comparison right now? But I know that for Vader, it's something that it's almost part of our consciousness, because we've all had it in our lives for so long that you actually see him on the set. It's pretty sort of significant. It's kind of moving. And look, a bucket list item for me, man. I just, to one day be able to be on the set of any Star Wars content. That's a bucket list item for me. That would just be, especially something that was attached to the saga films. That would just be the end-all, be-all. What kind of Vader will we see here on the show? We only saw him for a few quick scenes at the end of Revenge of the Sith in that armor, right? So where does he, pick up 10 years later? And before I give you let me give you Deborah Chow's answer, and then I'll comment on this. For us, it's very similar to Obi-Wan in the sense that he's in between these 2 trilogies. So he isn't the New Hope Vader quite yet, you know what I mean? So we are with the character sort of in the middle of this period. It is still Vader, obviously, but it's a Vader that isn't quite as fully formed as a New Hope. And you also have this issue to contend with of his appearance in Rogue One, and do you do more than that? If you have, and apparently we are going to see Darth Vader in action, what is that Darth Vader going to look like in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series when compared with what we saw of him in Rogue One, and then, of course, what we ended up seeing with him in A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. And there still is that New Hope conundrum of that scene, the final duel between Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader on the Death Star. You got to reconcile it, knowing that it was a different style at the time when they shot it, and it's paced so differently. But even when you go and watch The Empire Strikes Back, I mean, you have a much more active Vader compared to the one that we saw in A New Hope, and certainly it doesn't match the Vader that we saw in Rogue One. And again, I suppose it's just a matter of watching it and sort of retconning in your own mind, why that is the way that it is, and maybe that's an answer that we'll get in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. It isn't one that this fan needs, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. I've always been open to the idea of doing a special edition with a recut version of that. There was a fan version of the Obi-Wan Kenobi Vader fight in A New Hope that's up on YouTube that, for being a fan version, right, is pretty spectacular. And I was always an advocate for, if they ever wanted to go and do that. I know that so many people would call it sacrilege, especially based off of how many people got upset over the special editions in and of themselves. But for me, you could always go back and watch the old one, but I think it would be great to age a new scene to make it match in terms of film quality, but update it and make that fight a little bit more worthy to what we've seen in the movies that surround A New Hope. All right, moving on. Let's get to some... it's kind of leaks. There's not really any sort of leaking here, but we'll go ahead and put it under that banner.
The hyperdrive is leaking.
Sure it is. All right, so from Bespin Bulletin, Mystery Star Wars series Grammar Rodeo has started pre-production in Culver City, California. Last month, it was revealed that a mysterious Star Wars project with the working title Grammar Rodeo was revealed via Production Weekly. I corroborated these claims and exclusively revealed that the series would begin principal photography in June and would film until December. I also added, Bespin Bulletin writes, that the series would not be set during the era of The Mandalorian and that one familiar name was attached to the series. Around the same time, other outlets revealed more details around the series, including Discussing Film, who revealed that Jon Favreau was on board as a producer for the series and that Spider-Man No Way Home director John Watts was in talks to direct episodes of the mystery series. Cinelinx revealed that they had heard the series was set during the High Republic, focused on a group of preteens, and had the series described to them as Stranger Things in space. Murphy's Multiverse and the Illuminati both revealed casting details, which I saw too and did corroborate. I also was able to back up the High Republic setting by Cinelinx. Of course, the High Republic setting being the major publication endeavor by Lucasfilm and Disney over the course of the past few years. The series is just a few short months away from starting filming, but I've been informed and can now exclusively reveal that the show has been in pre-production for a small number of weeks at a studio in Culver City, California, where sets are being prepared ahead of the June start. The series is also due to film in Manhattan Beach Studios, where The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan Kenobi all filmed primarily for their respective series and houses a volume being the set that they shoot The Mandalorian on, The Book of Boba Fett, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Despite pre-production in Culver City beginning, Lucasfilm has yet to confirm and acknowledge the existence of the Grammar Rodeo series at this time. However, I am of the belief that the series could be announced on May the 4th or at Star Wars Celebration later that month. I'll get to more of that in just a moment. The codename Grammar Rodeo is likely a reference to an episode of The Simpsons, which we've discussed on the show previously. In the episode titled Bart on the Road, Bart and some of the other children trick their parents into letting them take a trip, with the kids telling their parents that they are going to a national grammar rodeo. Get it? Ha ha, very funny. I added that last part. The Mandalorian is currently still filming, and I recently saw them setting up a new set for the series, which I'll share more on shortly. Ahsoka is currently still slated to film in late April, which they previously revealed, and The Hollywood Reporter backed up. But with weeks being added to The Mandalorian, I wouldn't be shocked to see an ever so slight delay on the start date, writes Bespin Bulletin. Been doing a rewatch of Rebels, and I cannot sing the praises of that series enough. It is some of the best Star Wars storytelling outside of the films that they've ever done. It is so good. We just got finished. I believe we're on. I don't think we're on season. No, we're at the end of season 2. Before we get to the episodes with Darth Maul. At the two-parter, and the rebels in the show have just landed on a new planet for a new base, and it's the first appearance of sort of the space spiders that were based off of the old Ralph McQuarrie concept art from The Empire Strikes Back. And I went back and watched the passenger episode from season 2 of The Mandalorian, which might be one of my favorite episodes. This is the one with the frog lady and her eggs, and that amazing chase sequence between the Razor Crest and the 2 X-Wing fighters that end up on the snow planet where the Mandalorian is chased by those spiders. And just Peyton Reed directed that. He did Ant-Man, did the final episode of season 2 of The Mandalorian. Just such a spectacular episode. Season 2 of The Mandalorian is probably my favorite live-action content that they put out so far, between the 2 seasons of The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett. Season 2 of The Mandalorian is just spectacular. Next to those 2 Mandalorian episodes in The Book of Boba Fett. All right, so my expectation is that at Star Wars Celebration coming up in May, May 26th through 29th at the Anaheim Convention Center, my expectation is that event is going to be filled with many, many reveals. And I'm praying that we get an update on what's happening with the cinematic Star Wars, which I still feel that we desperately, desperately need. As I discussed on a previous episode, the movie-going audience is ready to go out to see films. That was definitely clear with the Batman. They're certainly going out in droves within quarters, right? It happened with the Batman. It happened with Spider-Man No Way Home. And I still feel that is where Star Wars serves best. I have listener feedback that disagrees with me. We'll get into that a little bit later on. My expectation is with so much silence from Star Wars for so long now, without any further film updates after what we were told was the cancellation of Rogue Squadron, Michael Stackpole, who wrote the Rogue Squadron novels, was at a convention and asked by a fan, and that conversation got misconstrued. For those that saw the news, it was reported on Twitter by this fan that Michael Stackpole had was consulted with Patty Jenkins on making Rogue Squadron, and that he was really excited to see the movie come to fruition. And this got a lot of chatter this week saying that, hey, the movie Rogue Squadron is still happening. It hasn't been canceled, perhaps. Maybe it'll still go into production. There is still a movie that's slated for 2023, but it was supposed to be Rogue Squadron, but then we were told it wasn't. Michael Stackpole ended up on another podcast in which he said, no, that's not how it went down. He had a conversation with Patty Jenkins, but it was more, I think he may have even reached out to her at some point, but it wasn't a consultation. It was more of just a Patty Jenkins says, basically Patty Jenkins admitting that she was familiar with the books and there was some inspiration for the way that the script had been written. But since then, we have not gotten anything. We've gotten a lot of rumors, a lot of speculation about potential movies. We had another one last week that I mentioned with a new writer on board, Damon Lindelof. My expectation is on Star Wars Celebration, seeing that Obi-Wan Kenobi will have at least the first episode will have debuted already on the 25th, that there's going to be a ton of live action reveals, maybe even some trailers for this show, the Grammar Rodeo, that's allegedly based in the High Republic, and probably details on whatever we're getting in terms of a motion picture. I mean, we're heading out to 6 years. I mean, we're going to be heading out to 6 years since The Rise of Skywalker, and that's a large chunk of time. And I think people are ready to get back to the movies. And so, look, for me, just a quick side note before we move on to some Rise of Skywalker stuff, especially some of these interesting details from some new concept art that came out this past week. Heartbreaking from this fan's perspective, and I know, and everything's relative, right? We've all been through hell when it comes to the pandemic and now with everything else that we're dealing with. But I had my entire Star Wars celebration when it was supposed to happen in 2020 all planned. I had it paid for. We were going to do multiple days at the park. I haven't been to Disneyland in now going on 6 years. I had passes for all the days of celebration. And, of course, like everything in the world, they got canceled. And just can't afford to do it now. It's just so heartbreaking. I really wish I could go. And really, we even wanted to do the podcast there as well. I was planning on it and was working on doing the podcast there at Celebration. It just couldn't happen, and was really hoping that I could pull it off for this year. But alas, I will be sitting in the comfort of my home here in Minneapolis and watching it online like so many other people. Sad face, John.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
But you know what puts a smile on my face? It's The Rise of Skywalker. I'm an unabashed fan of that film. John McCoy is a concept artist, and he released a series of sketches that he did for The Rise of Skywalker. Now, obviously, he released sketches, but he put a lot of text with it, too. So I kind of chopped it down to make it, a little bit more palatable for you, the podcast listener, since I don't have the visuals up in front of me. But I wanted to share this with you because it does share a bit of insight into the creative process. His name is John McCoy, and he writes, "Hi all, I wanted to share a bit more insight into the work I did with the amazing team for Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. I'm calling it a sketchbook due to the extremely rough, unfinished nature of the work. One of the core aspects to the Star Wars universe is, of course, the method of destruction of a planet. These were some very quick thoughts on ways that they could appear. And some of the images were they were kind of riffs off what we saw with the Death Star, with multiple lasers combining into one and shooting at a planet. Another piece of art had an abundance of Star Destroyers, all shooting lasers as well. And, of course, we got a version of that with the Star Destroyer fleet from the Sith Eternal that came from Exegol. He goes on to say, this was really fun. It was a really fun idea to get a chance to play with. We were asked to explore the possible story point of Kylo Ren venturing into an abandoned Coruscant. Also did some very quick exploration sketches of a potential prison. There were development sketches for the story point of Kylo Ren carving through miscellaneous unknown enemies, searching for the Wayfinder that would guide him to Exegol. And that opening sequence, and I hope we get a deleted scene of it sometime, that opening sequence that took place on Mustafar, which we do see in the film, was cut down drastically. Originally, for those that don't know, Kylo Ren ends up reaching a bog where this, and I know it sounds strange, but it's basically this giant, it looks like a baby head. It comes out of the water, and on top of it is a spider-looking creature that has a very sort of familiar to Star Wars alien head. And this was supposed to be like an oracle that would then go and tell Kylo Ren where to go and find the Wayfinder. And of course, in that very abbreviated scene at the beginning, we see Kylo Ren wiping out what were guardians, apparently, of the Wayfinder on Mustafar, and then ultimately doing the patented over-the-shoulder J.J. Abrams shot and walking over to the concrete pillar where he pushes off the top of it to grab the Wayfinder before it cuts to him in his TIE Whisper flying to Exegol. And I want to talk a little bit more about this later on. Not a nitpick, but an interesting design choice in that you didn't really realize it was Mustafar on first blush. You kind of do, right, from the beginning of the film and seeing the planet itself as they were flying to it with his Star Destroyer there. But the addition of trees on Exegol was, a bit different than what we'd seen from certainly Revenge of the Sith. But in terms of canon, there are some canon story points from ancillary material that talks about how Mustafar had actually changed a bit and some growth had taken place on the planet despite it being covered in lava. He goes on to say, this concept artist, John McCoy, in the film, there's a scene where Chewbacca is being interrogated and tortured. We were asked to generate some ideas for this scene and designs of a machine that would be holding him in this terrible in these terrible stress positions. I aimed at portraying a very iconic and unique pose that Chewie would be held in to make the shots memorable. One of my favorite sets in the film was Kylo Ren's White Sanctuary room, which we actually ended up seeing a bit on his Star Destroyer in The Rise of Skywalker, especially in the scene with the Force Connection scene when she is on Kijimi and they end up fighting and he ends up finding her on the Star Destroyer. As it felt counterintuitive to the unusual dark and gloomy spaces and antagonist habits, we were also asked to create a sense of multiple layers and levels, almost so that there was no clear way in or out of the space. I always found that chamber on the Star Destroyer really interesting, especially when you compare it to The Empire Strikes Back and sort of the equivalent of what we saw Vader sitting in those early shots on his own Star Destroyer, where the interior of that pod that he was in was actually white. Next time you watch The Rise of Skywalker, pay close attention to where Rey is standing there on the counter when she rests the dagger down. Really interesting design work behind what is apparently in real world plexiglass. Look at the design work behind the plexiglass. There's some PVC pipe and just some really unique, they call them greeblies behind there. At first I didn't really like it, but it has a very old school Star Wars aesthetic to it. So you'll know what I'm talking about when you watch that scene when she shows up in Kylo Ren's white chamber. On that Star Destroyer after the C-3PO, after the group ends up arriving there. One of the main designs, he goes on to say, we had for the film was an idea for the Resistance base, which would support the few remaining Resistance fighters for The Last Jedi. One idea I suggested was that the Millennium Falcon could become the actual base itself. I had a vision of an 80s toy set where compartments would extend and slide out, turning the original thing into something else. Later, the idea of the blockade runner becoming the ship, which everything was built around, was decided. And we started visualizing and developing that idea. If you watch the Skywalker Saga documentary that's on the Disney Plus app or on the DVD or Blu-ray, There's an interesting moment in there where Kathleen Kennedy is sitting there on the set with the blockade runner behind her, and she mentions how sad she was, kind of jokingly, that they have to tear it down. I wish somebody would go and grab a massive piece of land somewhere in America so that we could go and house these sets from any movies, but obviously Star Wars in particular, and so that people can come and see them. There's so much work that goes into these sets, and you look at that blockade runner specifically, or like the Millennium Falcon, and I know the logistics of picking a set like that up from its location and sending it somewhere would probably be an absolute nightmare. But think about how much you would want to go there. It's just a massive piece of land somewhere, middle America, wherever, where you could go, and maybe they build a bunch of different, like sheds, like you would see like at a production studio, and they house these things. Kind of like what you would see at the Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. There was one that we would go to, the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, Arizona, where I worked for almost a decade. To me, that would just be amazing. I mean, charge and give the money to charity, for crying out loud, but to see all this work we put into these sets just to have them destroyed. The tree from The Last Jedi. Could you even imagine being able to go and see the actual tree, even a portion of it? That would be incredible. All right, moving on. He also did some sketches and ideas for Kijimi. The images were very initial impressions of what Kijimi could look like. They had a very clear direction early on of many levels and steps leading to places, which gave the place a very dynamic feel. Did some sketches of an interior where an old friend of Poe Dameron would reside. Also included sketches in the design development of architectural features on Kijimi, as well as the final concept art of Rey, Finn, and Poe trying to avoid detection by occupying stormtroopers. Look, and I love every single of the locations in The Rise of Skywalker, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. They also showed some sketches of the Star Destroyer resistance attack on Exegol. A great challenge to take on, he writes. While there were different reactions to the idea of space horses attacking a Star Destroyer, I think that a character riding a horse-like creature holding a lightsaber was a really great look, which I aimed to portray in these thumbnails. And that was one of the things that probably one of the biggest criticisms I had of The Rise of Skywalker was that final battle sequence that took place. I've really come to appreciate it more in as much as I now realize what the intent of that battle was supposed to be. And it really was the focus of the Space Horses attacking on the Star Destroyer. And again, I'll dive into a little bit more of that with my commentary here in a moment. But there also were some sketches of the Death Star ruins and the inhabitants of Kef Bir. These sketches were great fun to do as they were encouraged to maximize the drama with the shots in terms of scale, composition, depth, and movement. We also developed the indigenous cultures, technology, primitive community, and architecture. It was meant to visually contrast an overwhelming height of technology the ruined Death Star sitting in its ocean. I just love the creative process. And much like thinking about Deborah Chow traveling to Toronto to meet with Hayden Christensen to talk about him portraying Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader again, the idea of these artists sitting down, being given these ideas, and then going out and creating concept art is just really, really cool to me. So much love goes in to all of these films, regardless of whether or not people like it or not, regardless of whether or not it's controversial or how controversial a piece of content that Star Wars puts out is. There is no mistaking that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people that work on all of these projects that adore Star Wars and are doing it because they love the fans, because they want to do something special for the fans. And that's something that I want to get into with one of these emails that I received. But that's one of the things with The Rise of Skywalker. And before we get to listener feedback, as I get to the main topic of the show and just spend a minute on why I believe that The Rise of Skywalker will eventually be called a classic.
This is not going to go the way you think.
Within the more hardcore portions of the fandom, those that follow podcasts, those that are more than the casual viewer, I think most of the casual viewers of Star Wars that liked The Last Jedi well enough, liked The Rise of Skywalker well enough. But those in the hardcore fandom, you listening, those that follow podcasts, those that read leaks and go on Reddit and read the news about the changing of directors and writers and all that, The Rise of Skywalker had a Herculean task and was carrying a ton of baggage. The Last Jedi, for the fans of Last Jedi, they wanted more of what Rian Johnson did in The Rise of Skywalker. Many wanted to see Reylo come to fruition with Ben ultimately living, right? Others wanted Rey to remain a nobody, regardless of how they felt about The Last Jedi. There were those that obviously hated The Last Jedi and wanted the franchise redeemed. Many didn't care for the choices made about the most burning questions mentioned before, like that of Rey's parentage, while others felt the film went out of its way to retcon The Last Jedi. I don't believe that it did, and I'm not going to go point by point why that is the case. I do believe that, in my opinion, the film did exactly what the film was supposed to do and what J.J. Abrams said the film was supposed to do. Conclude a 9-film saga while being its own movie and a sequel to arguably the most controversial Star Wars film ever made. The Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, is a tour de force of entertainment that works on almost every level for this Star Wars fan. Its breakneck pacing during the opening sequences, while on first watch made my head spin, I now appreciate as being one of the best opening 10 to 15 minutes of any Star Wars film. Every scene in the movie is memorable and meaningful. The action is spot on. The writing is both poignant and witty. It succeeds on an emotional level, and while the end battle over Exegol I do wish had been a little less kinetic, I appreciate that it tried something different, as it is unique as a space battle that is wholly different from what we saw in other films. It could have easily have been a repeat of my favorite Star Wars battle, and that is the one on the Death Star, or what they did in Return of the Jedi, or what we saw at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith, or the final battle that we saw over Rogue One. And Rogue One is probably one of the best examples that I could give, because Rogue One had a very similar dynamic going on, much like Return of the Jedi, where you had multiple events taking place. Now, Return of the Jedi, does a good job of balancing 3 of them. And you go to the prequels. The same thing happened in The Phantom Menace as well. When you get into Rogue One, though, and The Rise of Skywalker, you have 2 very distinct things happening. One above, and this one's an in-atmosphere fight, and the other down below, and that would be in The Rise of Skywalker. So I appreciate the fact that in The Rise of Skywalker, we got a different feel. It's washed over in blue, and the original intent was to have it be more of an amber. I think it would have been interesting to see, but clearly J.J. Abrams, Chris Terrio, and the design team thought that a blue hue over the end of that film would be more impactful. Without seeing what it would have been otherwise, I can't really give an opinion other than the fact that I personally like it. The point of the space battle wasn't necessarily the space battle. It was supposed to show tension, especially when all of those hundreds of thousands of ships show up, and be entertaining, and it was. But the real focus was on what was a ground battle on a Death Star with a bunch of individuals, rebels on horseback, space horseback, right, battling against the Sith Eternal. It was an amazing scene. It was supposed to be something that was an homage to what we saw in Return of the Jedi with the Ewoks, and it absolutely works when you look at it from that perspective, at least for this fan. Again, I appreciate that they tried something different. And the space battle is fun, especially when I still get goosebumps every time there's more of us. There's more of us. And you just see all those just thousands and thousands of ships show up. And then we get the soaring theme music to Star Wars, which I don't believe was ever actually used in film until that moment. Right? The Force Awakens gave us a reset from... The Force Awakens gave us a reset from the prequel trilogy. Right? The Last Jedi gave us a completely unique and different Star Wars experience, a lot meatier, a lot more in-depth, and shot beautifully. And The Rise of Skywalker, in my opinion, combined the best elements of those previous 2 films, while arguably being the most unique Star Wars film next to The Last Jedi. One day, when the baggage has left the collective memory of the fans, and we've moved on to complaining about other Star Wars content, I do really believe that The Rise of Skywalker will be called the classic that it is. That movie was made with a lot of love and had a lot of baggage and a lot of expectations that I don't think anybody could have ever met. It's different than what we saw with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It wasn't a story that was necessarily told in length over 2 films, and the dynamics are completely different for those that want to make comparisons to Infinity War and Endgame. It was different in and of itself, and it was a Star Wars film, and it's just a fun ride. And for me, again, there is no point in that movie that I want to skip over. On top of the fact that they had to deal with the loss of one of the biggest key characters of Princess Leia and Carrie Fisher going into that movie. And they really do. Once you kind of get past it and you forget the fact that this was footage shot for another film, it works seamlessly within that movie. I love The Rise of Skywalker, and I cannot wait to go and watch it again this weekend.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right, just got a couple of emails this week. First one comes from Mike Rotunda, which is always an entertaining read from the friend of the show. He writes, I love how they are finally connecting all the Star Wars films and animation to new content. I feel like Lucasfilm is finally getting it with Star Wars. And listen, I don't get like some of these others when they nitpick every little thing, like the way a character looks in live action as opposed to how they looked in animation. I understand it's going to look different. It's okay. I'm just happy we're getting Star Wars content. Let me pause really quick. And I don't want to nitpick over Mike Rotunda's email, but this is a really good example of sort of, it's all subjective, right? They have been connecting all the Star Wars content and animation for a very, very long time. It's not just happening now. We're getting more content, so it may feel that way in my opinion. But the truth of the matter is, this stuff is connected in many ways. Rebels was connected. Obviously, Clone Wars was connected. We're getting more Star Wars content, and so therefore things are being more connected. But there's always going to be that connectivity within Star Wars. He goes on to say, I never thought Star Wars would work on a TV series, but it does. I would like to see them actually continue from after Episode 9 and move the story forward with new characters and new adventures, but at least they seem to be getting it now. They want to focus on TV. Disney doesn't want to take Star Wars into the theater right now until the smoke settles from all the backlash and the heat that it got from those prequels. I disagree, especially based off my prior commentary. I don't think that it really has much to do with that. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's been a lot of things in life going on and people have been out of the theaters. They were going to have some distance from The Rise of Skywalker. There is no denying that. I mean, Bob Iger, when he was still in charge, said as much. And that makes sense just from a production standpoint and from a fandom standpoint. But I don't think it was because of the heat or backlash from the sequels. But again, you know what? I think that's open for debate as well. He goes on to say, it's a business. I just want to see more Star Wars, as do I. The more, the better. But at least they learned from The Rise of Skywalker that we are not stupid, writes Mike. You can't just put scenes in movies that are just action for the sake of action. You have to have reasons for things happening. It has to happen organically. You can just do a 2 hours. You can't just do a 2 hour supercut. That is for kids that don't know any better. At least they heard us. We are getting what we want. Thank you, John and Dave. All right. Again, and I disagree. It's all subjective, but I could go through every single scene in, for example, The Rise of Skywalker and tell you the reason and the purpose why it's there, and especially the action sequences. They all serve a purpose, as do most all of them in all of the films. But again, it's all subjective. And based on my prior commentary, I do appreciate the fact that Mike wrote in, and he's obviously welcome to his opinion and share it whenever he likes. I'm just glad that any fan is getting the content that they want. That makes me happy. Lastly, Miranda Alicia writes, since Grogu, friend of the show, likes food so much and he's become a merchandise mascot, should he start opening up his own cafe and become a master chef? Look, they should absolutely do more items with food in Grogu. That's a great idea. That little dude eats so much. I have a Grogu waffle maker, but they could certainly do more. So yeah, I could see that. I could actually imagine that happening like at one of the parks at some point in time. But thank you as always for the email there, Miranda. I appreciate it. And that wraps the show up. As always, if you'd like to support my Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast, I hope you'll take a moment and check out my science fiction space opera series, EMBARK. As I mentioned at the start of the show, I am down to the last parts of editing for Book 7 called Battle Planet, which should be out in the first few weeks in April. There are 6 books in the series right now available in hardback, paperback, audiobook for the Book 6 is now also available if you haven't listened to that yet. And, of course, ebook as well. Special price going on the opening trilogy for EMBARK, the first 3 books in ebook, specially priced at a discount. And you can pick up all the ebooks for $2.99 or less, apart from that trilogy, which is 3 books for $3.99. The story for Book 1 goes as follows. The stars are within reach. Interstellar travel now possible with global corporations, D Corp and Entercon, providing air and space flight to all humanity. But when an industrial accident inside D Corp sets off a catastrophic chain of events threatening all of Earth, the global evacuation begins. Amid the growing chaos, Taft Guardia, Keith Morrow, and a ragtag squadron of pilots discover a mysterious device. As the ruthless Synargum of D-Corp, with an armada of starships at his disposal, attempts to exploit the disaster, Taft and Keitha realize that they alone hold the key to saving humanity from the tyranny of D-Corp's evil leader. I invite you to head on over to mynerdworld.net. I just put up a brand new blog today. Interesting little story about Churches, which is a band that I love, that I actually included in Book 1. A song they put out that could be an EMBARK theme song. I wrote about it on the blog today at mynerdworld.net. You can also go to Amazon.com and search for EMBARK, Jon Justice, and pick up the books there for you or a friend. And also there, you're going to find a more detailed and more specific book blurb and description for Book 1. They are great for all ages. I write them for adults, but they are very much in line with the type of violence and content that you would see within a Star Wars book or movie. Kids as young as 11 have enjoyed them, and they are absolutely appropriate for kids as young as that age. But of course, they are written for adults. For I am one, even though I never really matured beyond the age of 16. Thank you so much for checking the show out, and I'll be back again next week with all the latest news. If you want to email me, talkshownerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. Until then, I hope wherever you are happy, you are healthy, and you are safe. And have yourself a fantastic weekend and week. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.